Hello, listeners. We are your co-hosts, Jeanine Bailey and Marie Quigley, for the Empower World Coaching and Leadership Podcast.
Empower World brings guests who are making a difference to the world to inspire coaches and leaders who lead with mind, heart, and soul.
Hello and welcome, listeners, to the next episode of the Empower World Coaching and Leadership Podcast. And today I'm not with Marie Quigley, my wonderful business partner, but I am here with Lyssa deHart, who I am so delighted is here. Lyssa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really appreciate your yes to come on board the podcast. I was introduced to your work, Lyssa, many years ago when my colleague at an Australian university college introduced me to your work, as she would post resources to the students that we were teaching and mentoring. And quite often she would refer to your work, your videos that you recorded, to support people to understand the ICF core competencies as expressed through a coaching conversation. So that was something that I first learned about you and really enjoyed watching and learning from those videos as well, Lyssa. And then I was introduced to you again through a mutual coach connection that we have some time ago, about 18 months ago, Tracy Clark, who I met at a training, and she shared with me your book, Light Up. And she said, this is a great book. You should read this, Jeanine. So I did. And I loved it so much that I introduced it to the Empower World Book Club. And we read that the other month. So we really enjoyed it. And I reached out to you and you said, yes, you would join the book club, but even better, come onto the podcast. So I'm really delighted because I know, Lyssa, you are really creating an impact. You're very, very widely known through the coaching profession. So I just feel very grateful that you've said yes to joining our podcast today. So thank you for bringing your masterful self here. And I'd love to hand over to you to introduce yourself to the listeners.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, number one. I'm Lyssa deHart. I've been a coach I got my original coach training in 2008. So I completed it, I think, in 2008. I didn't really become a coach until 2014. I was doing some coaching, but I was much more involved in my therapy practice, where I worked very specifically with complex trauma, dissociative disorders, PTSD, relationship issues. Those were sort of my primary focuses in the work that I was doing. And so I had a move in my life. We moved from one state to another due to my husband's job. And I got an opportunity to sort of reinvent what I was doing. And I was like, well, I think I'll check out this coaching thing. And so that was sort of a transition for me into the world of coaching. I've been, though, in this field since the late 80s, which makes me feel really old as I say that. And so I do have a lot of experience working with a lot of different types of people, and often under really difficult circumstances. So I bring that to the way that I think about and conceptualize the work that I do. So that's a little bit about me, I guess.
Yes, no, thank you very much for sharing. And yes, I really, again, appreciate the work that you do and the way that you bring in the neuroscience behind what we do as coaches and the coaching conversation, and particularly with metaphors. And so the book that I read and the book club read, which was called Light Up, and right behind you, really about understanding the science behind
Yeah.
metaphors. And what drew you into that work, Lyssa?
It's really interesting. I mean, like I said, I was a therapist for years, and I worked with people and I know they were using metaphorical language, but I'll be honest with you, I did not hear it at that time. I think I was really focused on an outcome. I was really focused on the movement from non-functional to functional, which is often the case in therapy, is you're really moving from, things are really not working at all to like, how am I at least functional? And then I did the transition into coaching, like I said, in 2014, and I really started that move from functional to thriving, or really, doing what it is that you really want to do. And I had, it's a different focus. So I think there was a bit of the different focus that was going on in my work. And one of the things that is, I think, extraordinary about people who are professional coaches, I wouldn't say everybody, but people in the professional coaching realm who I think are doing the best work are often doing critical analysis of their own work. And you certainly are doing that as you're moving from ACC to PCC, and then again from PCC to MCC. I'm a person who's continued to do it even from MCC on. If you are a credentialed coach, and I think it's one of the practices that very few other professions do, where you're really, other than sports, frankly, that's the only other time I really see people looking at the playback of what just happened, and looking at what their choices were, what they did, thinking of different ways to handle that sort of situation. And so we're in sort of a biofeedback loop as coaches if we're practicing our developmental, opportunity. And so as a result of that, this long-winded way of getting to, I started really looking at my work as a coach in a way that I had not done it as a therapist, because I was occasionally observed as a therapist, but not as often as I am as a coach. And I wasn't recording all of my sessions. These are people coming in with depression or PTSD or, complex trauma, dissociative disorders. You're not going to record those conversations, which in some ways is unfortunate, because you miss that opportunity to see what you're not hearing. And so it was only through this reflective practice that really started happening a lot more in my work, especially as a PCC. I was teaching in a coaching school, so of course I was seeing myself coaching people in class, and Zoom was coming online, so we were getting recordings of ourselves a lot more. And then moving towards MCC, and then as an MCC, again, a lot more recordings. And so I started really looking at my work in that kind of, not critical negative, but critical, thoughtful, analytical kind of way. And I started really highlighting the things that the thinker, or the client, as many people would call them, but I really use the language of thinker. The thinker was offering me, and highlighting the things that they were offering me, and starting to tune my ears to what was actually being said, so that I could actually hear them better. And it was in a class that I was teaching that I did a quick, like 15-minute coaching demonstration for the class. And it just like, and I think it was just sort of the perfect storm for me, where I had been really paying a lot of attention to my work, and I was doing a lot of this, transcript analysis. And then I was in this class, and I was with the right person in that moment. And what they brought was a really full plate. And they were talking about, my plate has just been so full. I've been really mindful of saying yes to things. And also and now, and for a long time, I was waiting for something to be on my plate, and nothing was there. And now all of a sudden I have so much on my plate. I don't know what to do with it all, right? And just this modeling of this really full plate was just like, it sent light bulbs flashing in my head all of a sudden. I got super giddy. It's not my best recording, because I get so excited. I'm like, oh my God, I heard the plate. And that's, I wasn't maybe that excited, but I was inside. I was like giddy, because I made this connection in that moment. And our entire 15-minute conversation was around the conceptual idea of the overfull plate being overwhelm. And because she basically said that. And so we began this exploration, like what would be useful to do with this plate in our 15 minutes together. And as she's like, well, maybe by the end I'd be able to take one thing off my plate. I'm like, excellent. Well, what needs to be explored in order to see what's of service to your plate? And she knew exactly what it was. She had a business relationship that was not going as well as she had wished. And we ended up having a really thoughtful conversation in this time. And by the end of the conversation, I'm like, where are you now with this plate? And by the end of this conversation, 15 minutes again, she's like, I'm going to scrape the whole entire plate clean. I'm going to start over. I need a divided dish. So she was able to really talk about boundaries, choices. She was talking about values around how she was making a commitment to a business relationship as though it was a relationship for life, because she said yes once, and that there was no reevaluation of the contracting that she was doing with people, that like I contract once and it is forever, unlike any other relationship in my life, because that all came out of the conversation. But it shifted her life in her mind, and it was because of how the metaphor, one, allowed her to explore this really sensitive issue around how she was saying yes to things, no to things, the ability to say no to things, her own mental scripts around integrity and her values around integrity, as well as boundaries. And how do you set maybe healthier boundaries for yourself and others, all in 15 minutes. And I was like, okay, not only have I been noticing these things, but now I can really start to see the landscape and the mapping that's happening through the context of this metaphorical language. So I think that was sort of that was the big, like, it blew my brain open.
As you blew up your your mind with that giddiness and that idea of working with metaphors. So what came next for you, Lyssa, to really incorporate that practice into the way you coach?
Yeah. So this was at about 2018. And I love to research things. I just love to research things. So I'm like, well, I'm not that special. So if I'm noticing this, I cannot be the first person to ever wonder about this. And so it really took me down a rabbit hole around metaphors. And I started studying like where the science was on metaphors, number one, because I love neuroscience. I mean, I think that's probably because of my therapeutic background and working with people's minds. And I also was just really fascinated and curious about them in and of themselves. So between the two curiosities, I just, I did a pretty deep dive on the science of metaphors, which really, brings out the neuroscience, because they don't exist in a vacuum. People may not use metaphors consciously. Right? Like when I'm saying like my mind got blown, I'm not thinking, oh, I need to explain this to you metaphorically. I'm just using language, right? And I know exactly what that means to me when I say something like that. And you probably don't even need to ask me what it means based on the context of how I'm actually saying it. And so it becomes a shared conceptual language. It's an idea container for an experience, right? And when you think about these experiences, now you've got a whole somatic, emotional, mental, physiological experience that's going on with this idea of my mind just got blown. My hands are even moving as I do it, because there's the metaphorical, you know, hand hand movements that go along with that. And I mean, we have emojis for it, because it is a metaphor that if you just need a smiley face with its brain blowing off the top of it, and everybody knows what that means. It means like, oh wow, you just blew my mind. And so we don't need to to have like, please explain what that means to me, honestly, because it's a shared experiential moment, because you've had those moments in your life as well as I have. So it becomes a way that we're listening and resonating with another human being in a way that we can't if I just say, I was having this moment and it was just like really exciting, and I felt a lot of it, this sort of thrill run through me as I was having this clarity that there was a connection here between this idea and these words in this moment. Yeah, maybe you get what I'm talking about if I lay it all out like that, but not in the simple, clean way of like, it just blew my mind, right? And so I think that that's the piece around metaphors is they resonate between two people if you allow them to. They become a shared moment, a shared experience in that moment. And how this works in the brain is this. We as early humans on this planet were in small hunter-gatherer societies, moving around, whether it was in plains or in mountains or, in tundras, it really didn't matter. We were just climbing all over the planet and exploring different places. And along the way with this exploring, we were also being attacked by wolves, bears, tigers, lions, elk, like whatever was out there. It wasn't like we just were the apex predator at that point. We tasted like chicken to a lot of things. And so, we had to be constantly on guard as we moved through our environment, checking for the tiger in the tall grass, so to speak. And we were also seeking food all the time, whether it was through hunting or gathering of roots and berries and leaves. And we were forming relationships, and we were starting to tell stories as about meaning making in our world. We were also moving through these environments, so we're looking at things, we're finding food, we're moving through environments, and we're also, and I think we could agree that we are the most proficient tool users on this planet, and we were developing tools. And so we were manipulating objects, whether it's rocks, a flint, arrows, whatever it was. We're starting to create the use of tools to make jobs easier. And so when you look at the structures in the brain and how the brain developed and evolved through time, we have structures that are designed for vision. We have structures that are designed for texture. We have structures in our brain that are designed to pick up on things like noticing food. How we move through the world, like our whole motor skills are all in our brain. And also just the way that we manipulate objects, and we puzzle things out. That's part of how our brain is structured. So it makes perfect sense then that when you look at the four primary conceptual metaphors that Lakoff and Johnson really started exploring, it was thinking is moving, thinking is seeing, thinking is eating, and thinking is object manipulation. And so these structures in our brains light up when we have conversation. Like even the idea of that blew my mind. It's a movement. This is a movement in time and space of an experience that I'm having in that moment. So they really relate very well. And so what this does is it tells somebody when somebody's using language, like, for instance, a metaphorical language, you can sort of track what's turning on in their brain. Like this is lighting their brain up in some way. It isn't important for a coach or for a therapist to listen to that language and be like, I know exactly where it's lighting the brain up and I know now where they need to go, because we don't. It's going to be different for each person, but we know that something's lighting their brain up. And they've done a lot of research looking at EEGs and fMRIs. And for instance, one of the studies that I write about in my book is if you say to somebody, I'm having a hard day or I'm having a rough day. Hard day, they know what that means, but rough day really lights up the textural receptors in the brain. Like those light up in a very different versus maybe not hard day, because that would also do something, but bad day. Bad is sort of a more theoretical word versus rough, which is a texture, right? And hard is sort of a texture also. So those words are going to light up those structures in the brain that have to do with how we, feel things. And so we know then that it's lit up their brain. And when we have in coaching or in therapy a starting point, I feel stuck. That is a very powerful metaphor people use all the time, and most people ignore it because they're like, okay, that's just whatever. What are you stuck about? And we get into the details of it versus just noticing the stuck. What would you want to have be different? And the person, I'd like to be able to dance. Excellent. So is that what we're doing, is really this movement from stuck to dancing? That's what I want to do. I want to move from stuck to dancing. Excellent. We then start to construct these two metaphors that both have to do with non-movement movement. Now, somebody may use a different metaphor. They may say, I'm feeling stuck, and what we explore it maybe a little bit more, like what are some indicators of where you'd like to be instead? They may say something like peace. Now, it's not a movement piece, it's a state of being, right? So it becomes a metaphor of a way of being. And so what we're doing then is we're looking at this movement from stuck towards peace. That may be acceptance of the stuckness. Maybe there's nothing I can do about this thing over here, so I want to have a different experience with it. And these become really important metaphorical containers for the movement that a person wants to make. And they're both metaphors, which I think most people miss because we're thinking they're just words. And they are words, but they are words that have an embodied experience attached to them in that moment for that conversation.
Wow. Yeah, fantastic explanation. Thank you for sharing that. So what I'm hearing is that as coaches, we need to be listening out for those words that potentially are metaphors in relation to their embodiment of a feeling, of a place they're in. And I also heard potentially it could be around a way of being, peace. Um, so that's what I was hearing, Lyssa. So
Yeah.
what would you say to coaches in terms of listening out for those metaphors that perhaps they might often miss? Um, hmm.
Transcript analysis. Start
Sure.
recording your work and getting transcripts and start highlighting everything that the thinker offered you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're in there. I have occasionally, like, very occasionally, like, maybe 1 to 2% of transcripts have no metaphorical language, or very little, or really, like, high end, like, it's so abstract that you don't notice it, right? But m most conversations, there's metaphorical language because it's just how people speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, and again, highly recommend your book, Light Up, because there are so many examples that you provide of the sort of the words, the phrases to listen out for that potentially get missed because perhaps um, they're just a couple of words
Or they're
or
so common. Like, how
mm,
many times do people say, "I feel stuck," and people go, "Oh, okay," and then they're like, "Okay, so what do you wanna do today? Like, what would be important for today?" And we ignore that stuck state, that recognition of the stuckness as the metaphor of a state of being, and instead, we're like, "So what would you like to be different?" Which is not a bad question, it's a great question. I think the bigger problem is what makes you feel stuck? That's probably way more problematic. But we might say more consciously, I'm really hearing the stuckness. What would you prefer instead? Which then we don't get such a, like, big open answer of what the person actually wants because they're not hearing stuck as a metaphor.
mm,
Only the listener's hearing it as a metaphor.
yes. And um, getting curious about the current feeling can potentially lead into a whole lot of detail versus
Negative detail also, like, "Oh, stuck. It feels like I'm just, like, in mud." Like, they'll give you more metaphors often, but we're now directing them completely towards that negative state experience that they're having, and they already know what that feels like, so that's not the direction of coaching or
Yeah.
therapy, really, honestly.
Yeah. We are here to support our reflective partners in terms of what they want to experience and how to bridge that gap between stuck, for example.
And what?
They want, yes, yes. And I really appreciated how you shared about how the brain lights up. It lights up when it's starting to reflect on those textural words.
Yeah, or the visual words or and there's way more than just for conceptual metaphors. So I talk about Kavaksis work in my book, and I mean, and I've come up with my own sort of conceptual metaphors that I've seen also. So don't feel limited to the four conceptual metaphors. There's many more than that, but those are the four that have been most studied.
No, really helpful. And for coaches listening to this, in terms of a perhaps a tip for them to explore those words, and because you talked about the lighting up, what would notice perhaps when speaking to a client that perhaps something is being lit up in the brain?
Well, the brain lights up and we don't see it happen. It isn't always a magical moment of, ah, I mean, that's obviously one. But I think it's really listening for those powerful words, those unique turns of phrase, right? I just had somebody say that, one of the things that they, as they're thinking about decision making, they're like, I do a lot of rowing and feel grounded in the water sometimes, which is weird to say because I'm in the water. And I'm like, what does grounded in the water mean in terms of this decision making? Because they've brought it up in relationship to decision making. And so they're able to kind of talk, and grounded in water is abstract. Like, I don't know what that means exactly to this person. And I don't need to ask specifically, tell me about grounded in water. What does that mean? But what does it mean in relationship to your decision making? And when the person has used language like that in context to a larger topic they're talking about, there is some connection in their brain, or those words would not have come out together. So we want to be really deeply listening to these things so that we can hear. And this really speaks into our presence, our capacity to be really listening deeply to the thinker when they're speaking, to not be jumping ahead to what is the next right question I'm supposed to ask, and really what is emerging in this moment in this conversation that might be useful to, or curious enough to, support more inquiry and possibly give them a framework of looking into their own way of thinking about something that is different than they would do all by themselves,
Mm.
right? And when I asked that, what does it mean being grounded in how does being grounded in water, like what is the connection for you between that and decision making? She's like, that's a really, really interesting question. And she had to sit with it for a bit and think that through.
Mm. Mm.
And then magically people make meaning. So she, makes meaning. And that's just the brain working at that point.
Yes, yes. And when I'm working with clients as well, I am also tuning into my own reactions. So if I'm noticing a response within me when my client is speaking, then I'm trusting being present with my client. I'm trusting that I'm getting perhaps some unconscious or perhaps conscious signals from the client that something's happening here. Paying attention to physiology, paying attention to perhaps the energy that might be between us, that might give me a clue that there's something here. There is a metaphor here to be explored or not. Um, I think as you say, being really present with the partner that we're working with can help us really identify those moments when the brain is being perhaps lit up.
Yeah. And it's not that metaphors are the only ways our brain get lit up, right? We go, something's happening, right? Like, so it doesn't have to just be some sort of flowery metaphorical language that does it, or non-flowery. Like, need to lean into feedback, but I find myself leaning back. I mean, that's a beautiful metaphor of this experience of moving towards or away from something. But a lot of people might not even hear that as the metaphorical powerhouse that it actually probably is. But I think people can also, I mean, they're doing all kinds of stuff while they're talking, right? And so you might be like, "I'm noticing a lot of this as you're talking. I'm curious, what does that tell you?" Right? And we trust ourselves to notice things and then be curious without assuming that we're right about the meaning.
Yes, yes. And of course, something I love to say is there are many roads that lead to Rome. So we might not pick up those key physical cues or maybe even the emotions, but there's so many ways that our client, our reflective partner, will send their communication across to us as coaches. So, and presence is the key. Our
I
presence.
think so too.
So, Lyssa, as we start to wrap up, I wanted to check in with you. What else might be important to share with the listeners about this work, working with metaphors, and how it can have this incredible impact that's going on within ourselves when we use our language?
I think that to be heard is so important to our human experience. Most people go through life not feeling heard, I would think, or at least that's been my experience with people, with myself. I think all of us have these places in our lives where we do feel heard, but then we have a vast majority where conversations are either superficial, people are bouncing from thing to thing to thing. So you start to share something and you get like kind of rolled over and the conversation moves on. I think we just spend a lot of time not feeling really connected or heard by other people. And I think that it becomes really important as a coach or anybody working in the helping professions to truly hear this person who's come to us who may not may not be feeling heard. And if we can truly hear them, and that takes our presence, it takes listening on the multiple different levels that you're talking about of like energy, words, body language, nonverbal, all the nonverbals, and also the verbals, powerful beliefs that get communicated, stories people tell themselves, values that they're communicating, these but these powerful beliefs that they feel about themselves and about the world, we need to be listening to those things and we need to be honoring that. And really, I find metaphors and listening deeply for metaphors, even if I don't hear a metaphor, I'm listening in a different way as a result of it, right? And so I'm going to hear something.
Mm.
And one of the things I consistently hear from people who I've coached, is that they felt really heard.
Mm. Yeah. It's such an important message, isn't it, Lyssa, that and I just notice through my day-to-day um, interactions with non with in my non-coaching work, how, as you say, people aren't really listened to deeply, and which means missing a lot of the unconscious important language, stories, beliefs, etc., etc. So to really honor the person or the people that we're with, that deep listening is something that we can all do that can make a difference in somebody's life. So I really appreciate you sharing that invitation to continue listening deeply to another. So, yeah. Thank you, Lyssa. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Really appreciate it. And again, thank you for the 4 books that you've written, which we'll include in your bio so that people can continue to learn from the wisdom and the experience that you've had, particularly for me, really enjoying the neuroscience behind everything that you've been sharing. So thank you, Lyssa.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
A great pleasure. And listeners, you can find out more about Lyssa through the bio, and we trust that you'll connect with her. We know that she's making, again, a wonderful impact in the world. So thank you, Lyssa.
Thanks for listening. You can find out more about us on our website, www.empower-world.com, and on our social media networks, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Be empowered.